of us. Great to have so many of you here this afternoon. Thank you so much. Okay, so welcome, State of Us. My name is Ed Whitelaw. I'm from the Real Ideas organisation based here in Plymouth and across the southwest. We're sort of southwest rooted social enterprise group and do a whole heap of things, but today isn't really about us. I have the pleasure of being one of your co-chairs and co-hosts this afternoon with my friendly colleague Frances. Frances, who are you and where are you from?
Hi everybody. So I'm Frances Northrop. I work for the New Economics Foundation, where I lead our work on local economies, and a really warm welcome to this first session of the State of Us, which is kindly supported by Power to Change. So we'll be exploring the state of work in this session, how people are building community economic democracy within and beyond the workplace. And I'm really delighted to welcome our speakers today. We've got Lindsay Hall, the Chief Exec of the Real Ideas organisation, Henry Lopez, the General Secretary of the Iwgb, which is the Independent Workers' Union of Great Britain, Dorothy Francis, who's the Chief Executive of CASE, the Cooperative and Social Enterprise Agency, and my lovely NEF colleague, Emily Scurra, who's a quality researcher, workplace shop steward and union activist.
Great, thank you. What a great bunch of speakers. Thanks for that, Francis. So, before we sort of crack on and get into things, a few bits of useful sort of etiquette and instruction. The agenda I will now drop into. I'm going to try and keep to time, but I'll drop the agenda in the chat for you in a moment. Secondly, we are recording today's event for the purposes of recording things, so please be aware of that. And we'll also be recording in the breakout sessions also. Just get my little agenda sorted. The hashtag for today's event is, of course, the State of Us 2021. I'll also drop that in the agenda as well. Okay, what else? So you'll all notice that you're all on mute. We'll of course unmute you when we get into the breakout sessions, because we do want to hear from you and we do want to hear your questions. Please do ask questions of our speakers as we go along. You can do this by dropping questions into the chat, but please, I ask people to sort of try and keep questions concise. Try and avoid sort of wider sort of comments. There'll be plenty of opportunity to talk and discuss more in the breakouts, because we do really want to hear from you. If you're happy, I would really encourage you to drop your name and your organisation into the chat as well. And also, of course, please, if you're keen to and you have to, drop your email in there as well. One of the great things about conferences is not just the content, but it's the opportunity to network and meet new people and make new friends. And though we're online and we can't be in the same space, we do want to really encourage that as well. So finally, just a little word, speakers, you can obviously have the power to unmute yourself, but obviously please do that when it's time to present or you're answering a specific question. So Frances, over to yourself.
Yeah, I thought it'd be really useful, Ed, to just give a bit of context for how the conference came about, because this was originally planned to be a whole day in-person conference that we'd been planning for quite a while. And so we've ended up breaking it into several different sessions with a plenary session right at the end. But Ed, I wondered if you just wanted to give a bit of background to that, as this is the opening one.
Yes, how did we get here? I suppose, well, first of all, it's worth pointing out that Plymouth is part of the Power to Change Empowering Places programme. That's a 5-year support programme to support the growth and development of community business here in the city. And part of that came about because there's loads of great stuff going on in Plymouth. Those of you who know the city will know that. So if I look out my window and I wander around my communities, I see, so much really fantastic activity going on, stuff that really inspires me and makes me feel hugely optimistic. I see social enterprises, cooperatives, community businesses developing work in our parks, renewing our high streets, generating electricity, driving healthcare, education and culture, doing some really great work that really inspires me. And I suppose the challenge comes is when you sort of lift up your horizons a bit more and you maybe look across the country and you look at what's going on nationally and you see sort of, I suppose, issues of inequalities and climate breakdown, corruption, racism, you know, a degrading democratic system, and you feel a little bit sort of, I suppose, less hopeful and a little bit more pessimistic. And I suppose the question I find myself asking is, you know, how do we make this good stuff better that's going on around us, and how much, to what extent is that good stuff a solution to some of the more negative things that we see around us that we worry about in society? And I suppose from there, you sort of start casting your eye around, going, well, who else has been on this journey? Who else has got this interesting sort of vibrant social economy, and, you know, what have they done and how have they taken this forward? And you look to places like, you know, Jackson in Mississippi and Barcelona, some of the speakers we'll be hearing about later in the conference. And you think, well, he's done a really amazing job of building on this, really building community power and economic democracy. And it tends to be wrapped in this rather sort of awkward phrase of new municipalism that most people can't pronounce. And so we thought, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. Maybe we should have a bit more of a conversation and a chat about that. So that's kind of led us to where we are. So I'm interested, you know, Francis, you're a think tank. You know, economic democracy, you know, powerful communities, they're all part of this idea of new municipalism. And I suppose I'm interested in what that means to you.
Yeah, so I think for me, the whole idea of the municipal has been a little bit hijacked into thinking about it as institutional, so like the state actors in a place, but actually the definition of municipal is kind of like the place. And so it feels to me that we're told a lot that the economy is sort of done by other people to us. So big corporations, the banks, you know, the kind of the anchor organizations in our places. And actually what we know, what our own experience of the economy is, that actually it's in our everyday lives where we are consistently a part of the economy. And I think over the last year, it's been proven that the real economy exists with people who are inside the informal economy, either paid, unpaid, people who are undervalued, like care workers, people working retail, hospitality, couriers, delivery drivers, that kind of thing. And also the sector that I tend to work in, which is the one that Ed was talking about, you know, what's broadly kind of dismissed as the community sector, like civil society, as if but actually we are the people who kind of pick up the pieces when the real economy doesn't actually work, because it doesn't work for people. So I think I'm interested in how you redefine the new municipalism so that it actually reflects that, and what are the, you know, how do we have that equitable kind of organisation of people, like the horizontal kind of organising that's in solidarity internationally and enables us to build the new institutions that we need, as well as reforming the existing ones that we've got. So yeah, so that's our kind of setting really for the conference. But what we'd really like to do now is hand over to our first speaker, who is Lindsay Hall from Real Ideas. Are you there and ready, Lindsay?
I am, and yeah, thank you very much, Ed and Francis, and hello everyone. It's this very strange sort of thing where you talk, and I know you're all there. I'm imagining all your lovely faces, but yeah, I can't actually see you, so it's slightly weird. So what I wanted to just sort of talk about a little bit was, well, I suppose a little bit about Real Ideas, what work means to us, I guess, and how we sort of sit, not just in the city of Plymouth, although we're very anchored there, but also beyond. So Real Ideas organisation, we were founded, a small group of us founded Real Ideas 14 years ago now, and we did it really in a way because I suppose at the end of the day, we wanted to be able to do the things that we wanted to do, which were really about trying to support people who had great ideas, and including the ideas we had, and find a way of making them real. And it wasn't, well, I still don't quite know of an organisation that's business model centres on that, which is, I think, probably slightly a strange thing. Most people have sectors they work with. We don't really have a sector. We genuinely start from problems that need solving, ideas to solve them, and then try and do something about them. And we wanted to do that because I guess we were sort of people who were basically saying that's the way we want to work, that's actually what we want to do, and we want to be able to have control over the structures and the way that power works and the way that communities, you know, we can help contribute towards communities, which in one way is a hugely privileged position, because essentially what it meant was, you know, and if we're honest about it, it means that, you know, you end up with people who have probably grown up with certain sets of experiences, you know, who have certain levels of educational attainment, who have the flexibility to be able to join in that way. So it's an interesting place to be a startup. It's not, I think starting things is brilliant, but I think we also have to think that there are lots of people who are really dealing with the basics and therefore maybe don't have quite the luxury to wander off into the world that we did. And we called ourselves Real Ideas mainly because we sort of wanted to operate in that messy space that Francis has slightly described, which is we're really interested in ideas, and ideas are lovely because obviously you can describe ideas in a beautifully pure way and you can be quite absolute about them, and it's quite a luxurious thing, lovely thing, really important thing to do, but it is, in the end, they stay ideas unless you can in some way apply them. So the real bit has always been incredibly important to us, because we do want to make things change. You know, some of the communities we work in, particularly Devonport in Plymouth, it's in the bottom 10% of indices of multiple deprivation. We still have people who pitch their tents outside our buildings because they don't have anywhere else to live. You know, we still have people who are, well, we still clear up, you know, the remains of drug use and all sorts of other things. So it's not a, you know, it's not a leafy suburb in any sense. It's a place where people are dealing with a lot of issues, and we wanted to be there, and we wanted to sort of try and see if there were ways of helping people have great ideas and really make some of them happen. And I think that essentially what we've learned in all of that is that it means that we are constantly operating with contradictions and dilemmas. And I suppose for me, that's one of the really interesting things about trying to work in a different way. It's because in the end, it all comes down to who has power, and who has power to make decisions, who has power to choose what they engage with, who has, you know, power to influence others who have impact on them. And so if you sort of sit in between the very real, and in some ways the very real and the structures around a lot of the way that work works, it's too many works here, but they actually do work because actually they take people in. And I constantly have this conversation because one of the things we do is work with a lot of young people, particularly young people for whom education in the system hasn't worked. And when you look at it, our education system is wonderfully linear. And if you go through and you succeed at each junction, then relatively it works for you. Relatively, it's not that difficult to get a job, and probably a job that you might even quite enjoy, and often one that's quite well rewarded. However, if you are part of the about 20% of our population that consistently education fails, then you're sort of popped out of this scenario, and you're left in a space where suddenly you find that you don't necessarily know what the next step is. You often don't have the power to make the choices you want. And sometimes that power is just because you don't know what might be possible. You don't know who to talk to. You might not have the networks or the connections to make any of it happen. You may simply not have the basics, you know, you might not have anywhere to live, you might not have any money. And so suddenly you find yourself in a completely different world where work means something else. And I suppose we've always been very interested in how do you solve that, not in a way that just means that for those young people we might be able to support, or anyone else in the industry that is now employability in our country, but actually how can you start to change some things so that you start to shift the bits that don't work, and you work in that middle space between the real and the ideas. So that's what we've been doing for quite a long time. We've got a lot of things wrong. And I suppose that's one of the things that I really wanted to sort of say at the beginning of this debate is I think we spend a lot of time talking about the things that work often, and I will talk about some that work, but I do also think we should spend more time talking about the things that don't work and the contradictions and the dilemmas. Because in my experience, we do lots of really great work with individual young people, and we've got some really brilliant stories. We also, at any one time, have young people for whom, for a range of reasons, actually the things that we are offering don't work either. And so I think how we all of us become more comfortable with being able to say that there is not one single way that works for everything or everyone. It has to be multiple, it has to be diverse. And what we need to do is to really enable people to find their own routes and their own journeys. So where we've ended up in our work with young people has been, we have a sort of phrase which is about interest, aptitude and passion. And that's that idea of, sure, you can go on a scheme which will train you to do something, pop you out the other end, and bit of luck, it'll connect with the job that needs doing. And you can earn some money and that's fine. However, for most of us, we sort of want work to be more than that, and we want work to connect with who we are. And so actually, one of the things that we sort of all have to learn is how can we find the things that link to the things we're interested in, the things that we actually are reasonably good at, we have some aptitude with, and passion. What's the thing that actually make us get up in the morning? And I've every now and then, I've got to the stage in my life where every now and then people ask me about my career, which I always think is really weird because I don't think I've ever had a career. What I think I have done is to just be quite good at saying I'm going to keep doing the things that I am interested in, I think I'm reasonably good at, and that make a bit of a difference. And I believe really firmly, and I think as Real Ideas we believe, that actually what we're trying to do is unlock with people the ability to see that in themselves, to recognise it into others, and then to harness that as we begin to move forward in this messy space that exists between lovely clean ideas, very structured sort of real world. So how do we glue those things together and try and make them work? In the context of Real Ideas, that has meant that we have spent, and we still spend, a lot of time thinking about how do we organise ourselves in a way that doesn't perpetuate the hierarchies and the barriers and the weird silos that so often mean that work isn't a great place to be. So we do have quite a flat management structure. We've always spent quite a lot of time doing that, which is really interesting because we have now grown from an organisation of handful of people to one that employs, well, actually just over 100 people now. And that's quite a big organisation to run without some structures. So we're back to the whole dilemmas. We have to have some structures, but we also don't want structures that stop the, I suppose, responsible freedom is the phrase that we're currently using at the moment. So we'd love everybody to be able to work in the flexible ways that they need, but we also need everybody to be able to think about each other and therefore to be responsible and to make the choices about that flexibility, which links not just to their personal needs, but actually to everyone who's around them. And I suppose where that then sort of takes us is into how does that, all of those types of philosophies and all of those issues start to apply in the places that we work. So one of the things I want to talk about a little bit is some really interesting work that a number of us in Plymouth have been involved in for, I think, probably the last 3 years, which has really been questioning the concept that a successful economy is only measured by growth in GDP, growth in gross domestic product. So normally, I'm sure everybody's aware, essentially what happens is a sort of weird equation is done, which essentially says that, you know, if you're in an economy which has more jobs and better paid jobs, then, you know, your economy is going in the right way. And that's not to say that good and better paid jobs aren't a good thing. But the problem is if wealth comes in such a way that actually it makes it look as though wealth is actually coming into a place. But really, when you dig under the surface, what you find is that only the top, maybe 20% of people are actually benefiting from better wages and better conditions. And then what you find is the bottom 20%, guess what? Nothing's changing for them. It's flat. It's just the same as it's always been. And so this has been the situation in Plymouth. It's the situation in most of the economy for a long time. And so we've been working with the Plymouth Growth Board, which is a very interesting amalgam of people in big industry, big companies, private industry, the public sector and the third sector, to say, is that what we want for Plymouth? Are we okay with that being the thing that we measure, or do we actually want to say, no, we need some other measures? We actually do need for that wealth to be more equally spread, or for us to find another way to allow people to be better paid and better treated in the work that they do. And we spent about 3 years going round and round and round in circles, sort of inching along, because obviously what that involves is people changing their position, and at a theoretical, at an ideas level, they've all been terribly supportive all the way down the line. But as soon as you've started to say, okay, we now want to make this real, of course things change, because actually therefore behaviours have to change, and actually somewhere in that power shifts. And in a very interesting way, last summer, as a consequence in some ways of COVID, as Francis has said, we've all learnt that actually civic power is different now. And suddenly we went from a sort of rather theoretical, yes, we'll have a charter, yes, we'll all buy into it, but it'll be this thing we do over there, to actually, no, this needs to be at the heart of Plymouth's recovery strategy. And it needs to be, it needs to be something that we all adhere to. So I'm now running out of time, so I'm going to just wrap up very quickly by saying, so where we've now ended up with is that the Resurgam Charter is an inclusive growth charter, and it has some really quite bold commitments that we are asking not just, small committed social enterprises to make, but actually the big companies and the big, the big public sector folk too. Over 100 people have signed up. So I feel like it's good news, but I also know that in the contradictions and the dilemmas that we will find all sorts of things where we're going to trip ourselves up as we go too. But anyway, at least we're heading a little bit in the right direction.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. And I just wanted to, a couple of things that really jumped out to me there. I think education, obviously an important part of giving people and creating power communities. Something about a sort of flat structure and a culture of democracy and social enterprises, which I always find really interesting and something to keep working through. But then there's that really nice sort of, numinous idea of sort of slightly dual power of how you're working sort of within the state as well as beyond and against it, which is really, really important part of partnership. Francis, I'll hand back to you.
Okay, so next up we've got Henry Lopez from the Iwgb. Really, really interested to hear from you, Henry. So over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Henry Lopez, the General Secretary of the Independent Workers Union of Great Britain, the Iwgb, which is a trade union that represents precarious workers such as cleaners, couriers, workers in the gig economy, such as private hire drivers who work for Uber and other operators, which are using these digital platforms, which is the new, basically, status of workers, where unfortunately is leaving workers without their basic conditions of employment that everybody has in this country, at least, some of us. Then I'm also someone who used to be an outsourced worker, used to work at the University of London, and in fact, my involvement in trade union was because of the problems I faced as an outsourced worker in regards to being exploited and having all the problems that migrant workers have in this country. Well, not just migrant, we see that many people from precarious employment basically are having this problem. But in my personal experience, this is how I got involved in trade unions. Before that, I didn't have any experience of any social movement or being involved in any trade union. Obviously, this has been an experience that have been difficult at times when I was going through that in terms of getting organized, getting involved. But through the years, I have learned that if we organize, if we decide to work as a community and in solidarity, we can achieve great things. And this is something that I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to bring my presentation that I have back. Okay, can everybody see my slide? So basically, the Iwgb, as I said before, I started working at the University of London as a porter. I've been working there since 2010 to 2018. At the university, when we started organizing, the reason we started doing that was because in some cases we were not paid for 2 months our wages. We had a lot of problems in terms of worse working conditions, worse contracts of employment. We were badly treated, badly paid. There was a big conversation for standing up for demanding better treatment. We also have issues such as the language barrier, the lack of support from traditional unions, but also we realized that the system was against us because there was no support or government support that we could have. And also being migrant workers was also an issue because we are demonized for coming to apparently take jobs away from people in this country, where this is a rhetoric that is being used more often. And we were called unorganizable. And the reason we started organizing and forming a union, which I mean, the Iwgb was set up in 2012 by CLES trying to organize in order to fight back against this exploitation. Since I joined the Iwgb at the University of London, we have been able to achieve great things, such as improvement in pay, improvement in terms and conditions, such as sick pay, holiday pensions. And recently, we ended outsourcing at the University of London. And since then, we have had a lot of support. I'm talking about community, creating a community. This is something that we did at the University of London through our campaigns by getting the support of academics, getting the support of students, workers, social organizations, politicians, and public support. The solidarity that we received from people was very useful for our campaigns. And since then, we've been going forward and have been able to achieve great things as a union. For us, it's been difficult to organize without having the support. So by creating this community, a way of fighting, we have been able to not just overcome our struggles, but been able to increase our membership and grow as an organization. So I'm going to go next slide. Basically, how we build community through our union for migrant workers, for instance. In our case, we have to. We believe that creating a democratic organization is very important because what we need to create is not just we're not just here to fight for better conditions, but what we need to create is leadership. Engaging members in their own struggles is important. Providing them with a space to discuss the problems, creating educational spaces where they can improve their skills and knowledge, but also making them, what is very important is making them feel part of this community that will work in solidarity with each other to achieve the successes that we aim to achieve. And for us, what has been very important is creating a union that has democratic participation, where its members not just participate, but take democratic decisions as a union. And our workers who are going to lead our union and run and keep organizing at the workplaces. Since we been functioning as a union, we have been able to achieve many successes, such as improving the conditions, and not just in workplaces, but also by taking employers to court, winning big campaigns. Let me go to the next point. So basically, forming the new Iwgb. The Iwgb has been working, forming new branches, and been able to create that community sense with the workers, that despite having all the problems and coming from different backgrounds, different nationalities, we've been able to work together and to support each other and to win things. We have created in our union something that was impossible before, such as getting cleaners, drivers who come from Asian minorities, foster carers who are mostly white British, security guards who come from African origins, for instance. So we have been able to create this community sense in the union that has been such an important thing for us. And our mission for future is to unionize all workers, all precarious workers. We have realized that through this pandemic, how important is that the unions have been in order to support the workers, and workers have also realized that this is very, very important. This community way of working together has been the key element for us to be able to fight against the problems that we have been having during this pandemic. For instance, we have had to run campaigns in order to put pressure on employers to furlough workers. We have to launch campaigns to improve health and for workers where employers weren't giving them, and have been able to achieve many great victories during this pandemic as well. So this is our goal as a union, is to keep doing that, what we've been doing. But we see that it's so important, the solidarity and the work in community in order to achieve the goals. Recently, we formed a branch that is called a holding branch, because we represent only some members in our branches. But we formed this holding branch in order to let other workers join our union, so we could form other branches by getting those workers involved and talking to them. As a result of that, we recently formed a yoga teachers branch. We formed the nannies branch, and at the moment we have 12 branches. And as a union that is punching over weight, we know how important is the solidarity and to work as a community. As I said in the University of London, in my experience, this is how we managed to achieve great things. And as a union, this is something that we're doing as well, by getting support from the public, from politicians, from other organizations that be supporting our struggles. And I would like to say to everybody that we would like you to support our campaigns, support us whenever we are launching campaigns as well, and following us on social media. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. That's just massive congratulations on what's like an incredible achievement over that short space of time. I know that the new wave of unions has been really inspiring to many, many people. I'm sure Emily will touch on that when she talks as well. But I also think that it's a perfect kind of introduction to the work that Dorothy's been doing. I know from speaking to Dorothy, the ethics of cooperation and working together for economic democracy and ownership are really key to your work, Dorothy. So I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. Excuse me one moment. I'm going to start my stopwatch to keep me on time. Good afternoon, everyone. and thank you for inviting me to speak. As you've been told, I'm Dorothy Francis, and I work for an organisation called CASE, which stands for Cooperative and Social Enterprise Agency. We are based in Leicestershire, but cover the whole of the East Midlands as required. And we promote social business. We help people to establish and grow community-owned social businesses, including cooperatives, social enterprise, community business, and credit unions. And we are ourselves a cooperative in that we felt we ought to practice what we preach. And so we have been a cooperative pretty much since the start of our existence back in 1982. Our strapline is change the way you work. And this reflects the aspirations of so many people and communities who approach us, as you will see. I'm here today because one of the conference organisers interviewed me a few weeks ago and then returned to ask me to speak at today's conference. I was a little bit hesitant and I said, what should I talk about? And the answer was, tell the story that you told me. I think it illustrates municipalism. So that's what I'm going to do. It's a personal story rooted in my own experience, but I hope that you will bear with me and will appreciate why I was encouraged to share it. The story starts more than 40 years ago. It's 1979 and I'm 18. I'm working as a telephonist for the General Post Office, which was the telecommunications arm of the then nationalised Royal Mail. It was a good job. This is the 1970s. I'm a black girl from a council estate and a comprehensive school. My father was a car worker, my mother a cleaner. They were impressed that I had a white collar job, but I went to work in skirts and blouses and high heels rather than overalls and boiler suits like them. I had a job for life. The GPO was very paternalistic. Eileen, who trained me, started there at 15 and retired at 60. It was that type of institution. Good pay, lots of perks. I'd landed on my feet, hadn't I? However, I wasn't happy. Something was not right. I just felt there had to be a different way to work. It wasn't a horrible job, but I just knew it wasn't the way I wanted to work for the rest of my life. I wasn't steeped in politics or community activism, but I knew I needed something else. I didn't have the language, but I knew what I wanted. I wanted to feel involved, useful, productive, valued. I wanted to know that I was contributing. That I was not just a small cog in a large machine. I wanted my needs to be serviced by work rather than me serving work. I wanted political democracy. I wanted my employment to recognise me as an individual, not just as a unit of production. Also, I wanted to play a part in changing the world. That might seem a little highfalutin, maybe, but it's what I wanted. And I knew that I could not simply work, just work for 40 plus years. I wanted to make a change. I wanted to do something I was passionate about. I was very frustrated. I talked to a few people, but they either laughed at me or they didn't understand what I meant when I said, surely there must be another way to work. This was the era of factories, industry, offices. People simply worked and then they retired. It was as simple as that. So why was I asking questions of the system? I was actually deemed odd enough by my peers already. I read a lot of books. That was enough to make you seem odd. So I learned to stay quiet. I was 18 when I started at the post office and left in 1980 when I was 19. To the absolute fury of my manager, who was aghast that I was walking away from a job for life in exchange for 3 years on a student grant and an unknown future. She said I was ungrateful. However, I left. And the thoughts simmered in my head for the next few years. I went to university. I came out the other side after 3 years. I was still seeking a different way to work. I was accepted by the University of Warwick to study an MA and trained to be a community social worker. Maybe that was the way to change the world. And then, out of the blue, I was approached by some friends who were setting up a bookshop, but not just any bookshop. They wanted to set up as a cooperative. And I said, they asked me whether I'd join, and I said, yes, I'll do that until September comes around and I start at uni. But I said, what's a cooperative? And they explained it to me. And it was like a light went on in my head. I never took up the place at university, and I never did become a social worker, because the values and principles of cooperation instantly resonated with me. The idea of democracy, of one person, one member, one vote, of equality, of having equal rights and benefits, of being treated justly and fairly because of the principle of equity, of solidarity, of members supporting each other and other cooperatives and community. Those all resonated with me. Also, what resonated was all of this is built on ethical values of honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. It was about people, not just economics. I was 22 years of age, and I'd been looking for this way of working for at least 4 years. I didn't have a name for it. I considered that I was lucky to stumble on it at just 22 because it changed the course of my life. I've worked within the cooperative and social business sector ever since. But why did I have to find out by accident? Why was this not taught at school? I was taught capitalism and how the state expected me to be a good and compliant worker, but never taught about ownership, democratic workplaces, or controlling my own work and life. Workplace organising is important, as the previous speaker has just so eloquently said. It's important how we work, because workplace organising can be a model for how people organise otherwise in the world, in their communities, social life, even in their religion. I knew that if I controlled my work, I would better control my life. Work is so important. In the old days, and by the old days, I mean pre-March the 23rd, 2020, before we went into lockdown, when we actually went out to work, we spent more weekday waking hours with colleagues than with loved ones. So I've always felt that it was essential that work is satisfying and has meaning. But how many people can truly say that about their work? At 22 years of age, I knew I couldn't wait for the state to transform my existence and give me control of my life. This was 1983, and it was only in 1976, just a few years earlier, that the state had passed legislation that made it illegal to deny me employment, housing, or services because of my colour. In 1975, I went for a Saturday job in a chippy, and the owner told me that he couldn't afford to employ me because his customers would not take chips from a darkie. No offence, love. Already at 14, this was my experience of work, and I knew that I could not endure that for a further 50 years. I was lucky to stumble onto cooperatives, as I wouldn't have otherwise found the workplace democracy and control that I was looking for. But what was the attraction, and how does this relate to municipalism? For me, it was about sharing and creating power. It was about giving incentive to collaborate. It was about promoting discourse and dissent without confrontation. It allowed me to ask why. I always wanted to know, still always want to know why. I think in questioning why, we come to how, and then what can we do to change this? Co-ops for me were about creating ownership and control. This is very important to me because as a Black woman, in fact, I'd say it's essential. As women, working class people, and people of colour, we are denied control. It's not given to us. And I needed a form of work which allowed me control over my life. And in co-ops, I found a way which was open, horizontal, without hierarchy, and promoted face-to-face interaction instead of faceless communication, which came down from on high. It allowed teams to make fairly instant decisions rather than having to take requests up to 3 or 4 levels of command. It was honest and accountable. Those ethics were inbuilt. And I realized that cooperatives is where we could build resilience through working together, through sharing goals and values, having the same principles. And I knew that what we were doing was building wealth and strength in communities. I'm not sure that I had all these words in my head at the time. I'd have been an odd 22-year-old who went around talking of community municipalism and shared wealth. However, a form of those words is what drove me to seek change and was what made me walk away from a good job in my teens. What I like about my job at CASE is the opportunity to turn rhetoric into action, to apply values and ethics to enterprise. I sometimes worry that we're caught up in discourse and wonder how we can put it into practice. How do we make this mean something to people? I remember one of my friends saying to me, well, that's a lot of big posh words, Dorothy, but how do you make them work? And in planning this presentation, I was encouraged to illustrate with some people who, by their own admission, are not posh at all, but who I feel are an example of municipalism in action. So let me relocate you now. You're in Shepshed, a small town near Loughborough. It's 1993. And I've just met two women, Pauline Grays and Sarah Sanders. They're good friends, and they've both been made redundant for the third time each. And they're a bit fed up. And they've decided that they never want to line up again at a notice board to see their name down as someone who's unwanted and surplus to requirements. They have a vague thought about setting up in business. They choose domiciliary care, looking after elderly, infirm and ill people in their own homes instead of in hospitals. This was quite a new thing at the time. And as the first speaker talked about, we need to talk sometimes about the things that do not work. And one of the things that was not working was the social services model of looking after elderly or infirm people who needed care. It was moribund, it needed change. And Pauline and Sarah felt they could do that. And in doing it, they wanted all workers to be equal and have democratic control over what they did. That was immovable in terms of what they demanded. So they knew what they wanted, but not how to do it. They came to an event I spoke at and came up to me afterwards and requested a meeting. They said, we're not business people. I said, what do business people look like? They said, white, middle class, middle-aged men in grey suits with a degree. Not two women who speak in a Leicestershire accent and litter their sentences with "your beauty" and "hey up me duck." If you're outside of the East Midlands, that's a very common saying. They said, we're two thick working class women from Shepshed. We have no qualifications. And then Sarah corrected herself and said, actually, we both have a certificate that shows we can swim the length of the baths. I said, I'm not quite sure how we can apply that to your business, but let's see. They wanted to own and control their own work, and I helped them to set up their enterprise to do that. They thought if they could employ eight people, they'd be doing well. A business of 10 would have done them fine. They struggled for the first 2 years, but grew steadily, 20, 50, 70 members. By year 5, they employed 150 people. They were the single biggest employer in Shepshed. They also covered Loughborough, Colville and Measham. Fast forward to year 10, and we're at the UK Social Enterprise Awards in County Hall in London. Huge event, glitzy, lots of razzmatazz. Pauline, Sarah and I went down. Everybody back in Leicestershire, fingers crossed, bated breaths, waiting for the phone call. They stood a good chance. We were really excited. And then the envelope was opened and a name was read out, and it wasn't Shepshed Carers. They hadn't won. And I was so disappointed. I'll try not to cry in telling this story because I've told it a number of times, but I always well up. So I've got a tissue here, just in case, because I don't think, oops, just dropped it. I don't think that tears and a runny nose is a good look on camera. So I was crushingly disappointed for them. And I said, I'm sorry you didn't win. I'm really sorry. But Sarah sat back quite satisfied and she said, it's okay, we have won. I said, how? You're not the person up on the stage clutching the trophy and having your picture taken with a B-list celeb. And she says, Dorothy, we are already winners and have been for years. We became winners the day you believed in us. But she said, we're not the only winners. It's not just us as founder members who have won by creating our own employment, but all the member workers of Shepshed Carers who have good employment. And the people we care for have won by having better care, and their families and loved ones have won. And local employers who retain skills because employees don't need to give up their jobs to look after their loved ones. Well, they've won too, Dorothy. And the local economy is a winner because we're local people and we spend our money on the local high street. And overall, we're winners because of what we've done for the reputation of care work. And we are all winners because you believed in us and gave us the opportunity to be winners. You showed us how we could have ownership of our work and lives, how we could build resilience as a community, how we could develop economic and community control. You made us into community-focused people who have had a huge economic impact on our community. You showed us how to defy authority to create community power and how to build community inclusion, representation, and participation. And Sarah said, you aided and abetted two thick working class women from Shropshire to change the world, albeit a small part of Leicestershire, but still the world. So she said, we have won. We are the true winners tonight, not the people on stage clutching the trophy. And you can perhaps understand why even now, telling this story once more after so many years, I'm still fighting back tears because it always makes me cry. I find it almost impossible to tell that story without welling up. And I believe that that is a clear description of municipalism. Pauline and Sarah wouldn't have called it municipalism. To them, it was about a structure that worked. It was about ethics, values, principles, community control and empowerment. It was what was right. It was the only way to do it. You could say that the only way was ethics. Sorry, terrible joke. I thought I ought to lighten the mood. And the postscript to this story, Shropshire Carers returned to London the next year and they walked away with the trophy as Social Enterprise of the Year. So they were truly all-round winners. And my hope is that we can, through municipalism, help all communities to become winners. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Dorothy. Such a round of applause going on there. Such a fantastic set of stories and such rich content that really helps us take us through, I suppose, really from how we can start in our communities to build wider community power and economic democracy. And you know, there was so much in there, but just 2 points that really jumped out to me. One is sort of what motivates us as human beings. People talk about the idea of self-love and social love. Yes, we want a meaningful job that creates us, you know, some income and meets our needs, but also we need to have, as human beings, wider sense of purpose, to be valued in our communities and to be recognised for that. And also there's another sort of key municipalist idea in there, the sort of politics of proximity, I suppose. I mean, one of the sort of, I suppose, the critiques of our democracy is that, you know, our interaction with it is, to many people, just a sort of intermittent vote now and again. And I suppose if you're able to increase and grow democracy, actually, how does that happen in a much more everyday way? How are we able to influence the community and the businesses around us? And that's a really important part of municipalism. So we're bang on time. Francis, our next speaker, please.
Yeah, and also a thank you to Dorothy. I am so glad that we've got that recorded now with you speaking, because that is, I'm really glad that Ed stepped in as well, because I actually was crying. So thank you a lot for that. So now over to Emily, who is going to talk about probably about how we can kind of align cooperatives and the union organising together in a way that's quite practical and on a high street near you. Emily, over to you.
Yeah, thank you to all the other speakers as well. It's such a varied range of speakers. It's been really interesting. So I've got a presentation which I'll need to look at because I'm not as good at speaking from the heart as Dorothy. So I'll just share my screen. Cool. So yeah, as Francis said, I'm going to talk about a kind of an idea and a proposal that came out of some research that I did, and also some of the work that I've done as a workplace rep and a union activist. But I think before I go on to the kind of more optimistic sort of what we could be doing, I kind of want to set out the state of play in terms of working life at the moment, which Henry has already alluded to quite a lot in his talk, and I'll just kind of sort of put in my 2 pennies worth on that as well. So even prior to the current state of play, pre-COVID, if we can remember that, we have borne witness to a crisis of work since the late 1970s. So I'm just a bit of a kind of think tank stats here. Wage share of the economy has declined significantly. So that is the kind of the amount of the economy that is going towards wages for workers rather than sort of national income. And we can link that quite neatly to fall in union density. Particularly that is a direct correlation, a lot more than technological change, which is often given as an explanation for why working conditions and wages have declined so much. And actually we can see a far greater correlation between decline in worker power represented through union density. As Henry spoke about quite a lot as well, we've seen the rise of insecure and casualised precarious labour, where workers are denied basic rights. I'm just going to move on. And yeah, I read some research recently that said that nearly 1 in 10 workers engage in platform work, which to me was a really in the persistence of gendered and racialized injustice in the workplace, a dereliction of duty of care, which is a phrase that we actually don't really even use very much anymore, from the workplace towards its workers. Then we also have the kind of impending challenge of the need to transition to a green economy, and we know, as based on historical experience, that technological or significant change doesn't necessarily mean great news for workers unless they are very much at the forefront of directing that change.
Emily,
and then,
sorry, can I jump in? Are you able to put that on presenter mode for your presentation?
sorry, can I?
We can see it a bit better. You just about see it. But, sorry, jump in.
I mean, it's not actually that interesting. You can't
I'm
see
sure it is.
If you click present in the top right-hand corner, that should do it. All right.
So I do have some speaker notes, though. I think I probably won't be able to read those if I do go on to present mode, which I might need to do. So I might need to flip back and forwards if that's all right.
Okay.
Which I actually think I'm going to do now. Hang on, sorry. Yeah. Am I okay to just stick on this mode of present, like if you just kind of try and ignore the screen a bit, and then I can,
we can manage
rather than reading the screen.
Fine.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I'm just going to go on to just thinking about demands and what we should expect from the workplace. So when I started doing the research, I did some research into self-employed workers and challenges faced by the self-employed workforce, which does include precarious workers. We established, myself and my fellow researcher established a bit of a sort of loop you should expect from the workplace. And I mean, I don't want to necessarily read all of these things out because it shouldn't be exhaustive as well. It should be a continuing conversation about what our demands are. But at the very least, it's decent living wages, sick pay, holiday allowance and pay, remunerated parental leave, pension scheme, agreed hours, recognised professional standards, a legal contract, right to union representation, the ability to withhold labour. These are not things that are guaranteed in the workplace at the moment, and they are quite fundamental material rights that are being denied to lots of workers at present, or not being adequately enforced. I mean, one kind of easy example of that is just having a decent living wage that does actually cover the costs of people's living, is not something that we can see across the workforce. And then kind of more sort of cultural and social factors. Workers should have access to a level of autonomy and control within the workplace. As Dorothy spoke about, control is really important, and not feel like you're just a set of tools. Independence of voice and the ability to be vocal, community and collectivism, a social network, professional development, and a feeling of value and recognition were some of the sort of minimal things that we looked at as we started our research. And then kind of with that also protection against and limits to punitive and excessive control over time and scrutiny over time, low wages that are unable to be to cover the cost of living, pay freezes, costs incurred by the workplace, which we can see is pretty ubiquitous to have costs incurred by the workplace, financial costs, workplace related accidents, and a lack of necessary training or development. And then we should also have protection against more sort of social and cultural factors, compliance with or homogeny of principles and values, so kind of like
I think
we lost
Emily.
Oh, yeah. Just getting into the flow of things. Okay. Well, maybe we'll get her back in a minute, but we should carry on regardless. I was kind of got a bit of a moment for some conversation actually with some of our other speakers, which I think will be really interesting. And I was thinking about this last week. We had a unique opportunity to have both, you know, a cooperative, a social enterprise, a union, and a think tank. We didn't have a think tank, she's disappeared now, in the room, which I thought was a unique opportunity to have a conversation about sort of, I suppose, power in work. And I tried to crack a gag about this over Twitter last week, but it kind of fell like a piece of tumbleweed from my Twitter feed. And I suppose I'm really interested in the idea of culture and the sort of culture of democracy. And I sort of say, I mean, this is a conversation for a question for all our speakers really, and I'm kind of interested in your views. Culture sort of eats structure for breakfast, and they say that you know, democracy is downstream from culture, and we've certainly seen that going on with sort of culture wars and things that are around us. I mean, my question is culture, you know, is the culture of democracy in the workplace equally, if not more important than a structure of democracy? And I'm interested what our speakers think of that. So I want to go first.
I see Emily's just come back, so maybe the speakers can dwell on that. Emily finishes off.
Yeah,
hold that question.
Sorry about that, guys. I would say that another basic minimum of the workplace is having decent internet connection, which is really not the thing that I seem to be doing well with so far. Don't know. I think it's because I've got too many tabs open, but yeah, apologies about that. I will just rattle through the rest of my presentation so that we're not too delayed, and I'm really sorry about that. Right, I'm just going to share my screen again and hope that it goes more smoothly. I think I'm not allowed to screen share because I'm no longer a host. I've been I've been demoted.
We can reinstate you, I'm sure.
Thank you. Is it a punishment for my bad internet connection?
We don't do that around here. And we've got plenty of time as well.
Okay, that's good. Thank you to the other speakers for being so concise. All right, so let's hope this is working. Yeah, so yeah, that's I just kind of set out a bit of a sense of the basic demands that we should have from our working lives, which I think are demands that often we have forgotten about as standards have become so dialed down. It's often the case that we find ourselves as people in the kind of progressive end of the spectrum trying to fight for those rights to be reinstated, rather than having the vision of what we should actually be expecting, the picture of what we should be expecting. But compounded with the kind of dialing down of working conditions, we've got sort of twin challenges of the pandemic and the impact upon the workplace and the workforce of that, and green transition itself. So the rise of poor quality and insecure work and the failure for the workplace to accommodate needs has highlighted the current crisis that we face post-lockdown. And the anticipated unemployment crisis could serve to working workers' power even further, because obviously whilst 10 or 50 people are kind of waiting to get your job, it's very difficult to be able to demand for what sort of increased rights and better your conditions. And the only way to kind of fight that is through collectivizing our demands and our struggle. And then in terms of green transition, the climate emergency has not gone away in the pandemic, and we will be facing the need for significant change to lots of roles in the workplace, across the workforce, across different parts of the economy, in high carbon industries, and also industries that includes industries that aren't necessarily that obviously high carbon. So things like retail, for instance, is what I'm looking at the moment, and that will need significant change if we are to meet the challenges of decarbonising the economy. But I recently read a series of essays by Arundhati Roy, who is a novelist, but more recently an essayist. And she talks about this concept of the pandemic as a portal, which I think is a really, the way that she articulates it is was perfect, really, because we shouldn't see what's happened in the pandemic as a positive thing. I think it's really negative when people frame it in that way. Because obviously we also have to register the significant amounts of death and grief and mental health crisis that's come as a result of it. But we can see it as what Arundhati Roy calls a portal for seizing an opportunity to kind of change the world and the way that we work. And there's a couple of things that are quite specific to the world of work that have come out of the pandemic that I think we should be seizing. So one of those is the social value of work and people sort of reassessing the social value of work. So we've got this term key workers now, and that is basically a kind of catch-all phrase to have to show work of undisputed social value. And you kind of, the way that I think a lot of people are thinking about this at the moment anecdotally is that pitted against what the anthropologist David Graeber calls bullshit jobs. Apologies for the language there. Which are either completely unnecessary and harmful to the worker because there's no value in them, or deeply harmful for society. And David Graeber points to advertising as that. But there's lots of other examples. The financial sector can be as ripe with examples there. So that kind of analysis, that fresh analysis of the social value of work is something that I think is really worth capitalising on. And then secondly, sort of thinking about the unemployment crisis that we're about to face in terms of a redistribution of employment. And at the New Economics Foundation, where Francis and I work, we have made the case for decades now on shorter working hours and the value of shorter working hours. So that might be a shorter working week or shorter working days. But basically what it means is that less of our life is taken up by work, and we are more free to spend time doing things that we love, having greater leisure time, more time to dedicate to caring work. It can have really significant environmental impacts because disposable kind of culture is something that is very much as a result of a kind of a lack of time for lots of people because so much of their life is consumed by work. So thinking about instead of lots of people being overworked and lots of people either being underemployed or unemployed, thinking about that in terms of a redistribution of employment and everyone's working hours becoming reduced as a result is another opportunity that we should be sort of thinking about right now. And then finally, the racialized impacts of the crisis is something that, despite the government's most recent investigation into institutional racism, we have seen the massive disproportionate impact upon BAME communities of the crisis, and that being linked to social factors that obviously really need addressing, and particularly we can see this in the workplace with the high proportion of key workers who are BAME and the high proportion of healthcare staff, BAME healthcare staff who've been lost as a result of the crisis, and the kind of need again to kind of address the gendered and racialized disparities in the workplace that we saw in 2019 when we did some research on the state of work, and has only become even more evident in the wake of the pandemic. So I've kind of flitted backwards and forwards a bit in terms of talking about particular moments right now in terms of green transition and the pandemic. But this particular proposal came out of some research that was prior to COVID. It was some research that we did in 2019, as I referenced before, on self-employed workers and the challenges facing the self-employed workforce. So we kind of thought about the varying crises that are facing us as workers across the workforce, and the need for sort of collectivizing and kind of pushing back against these things. And also that kind of coupled with the declining union density and the need for revitalizing that, and also kind of bringing or linking that with the need to revitalize community spaces as well, that we have seen really massively decimated as a result of austerity and closure of libraries, decline of the British High Street. And yeah, so we kind of came up with a concept that was based on historical and global examples of what we termed worker centres, with the title being specifically something that would recognise that everyone who needs to work, which is the vast majority of the population, is a worker of some sorts, whether they're unemployed, precariously employed, or in secure employment. That the need to be a worker is obviously pressing for all of those different categories of people, and there should be no differentiation between workers and communities. So the proposal that we kind of came up with just had this kind of utopian vision that was based on lots of reading that we were doing at the time, and kind of it's a sort of idea of a physical space for unions to work from and to organize from, a kind of community space and a collective space, a space for atomized workers to feel company and solidarity through co-working kind of physical space, a place for training and skills, and also political education, by way of exposure as well as in more formal kind of context, and mutual financial support and redistribution of social and cultural capital for navigating social security and services. So yeah, I mean, I just to sort of go back to the research specifically, I've kind of identified the challenges that we're facing and the in our working lives at the moment. But the challenges that we identified in the focus groups that we were working in were that a lot of these, the issues that are faced in the traditional workplace or the kind of employed workplace are exactly the same in the self-employed workforce. And instead of it being pull factors and, you know, this like wonderful idea of self-employment, of being your own boss and, you know, being able to escape from the worst parts of the workplace was really not something that was realised for a lot of the workers that we spoke to. Well, for all of the workers that we spoke to, actually. And then the kind of additional pressures of the blurred boundaries of the workplace, greater responsibility for overheads, loneliness and isolation. And so a lot of the kind of features that we proposed in the worker centre idea speak to the things directly mentioned by our participants. So, yeah, I mean, Henry has already kind of spoken quite a lot about the necessity of building worker power, and I won't repeat things that he said because he's got much more experience than me in this sense, but it certainly isn't the case that we will have a better working life unless we fight for it. You know, we do see that automation is taking away some of the worst jobs, but also, you know, that will just increase unemployment unless workers are kind of at the forefront dictating how that change will happen. And there have been some fantastic examples of new tactics emerging to build worker power that meet the challenges that we're facing at the moment. Iwgb have been fantastic in organising gig economy workers who are some of the most atomised and disenfranchised workers in society. If that can be done, then honestly, anything can be done. And then also thinking about CWU Union have done some work on trying to get, well, have done work on, as postal work has become increasingly automated, reducing the working week of those workers with no decrease in pay as productivity has stayed the same. And we want to see more of that, obviously, as worker power can start dictating the direction of travel rather than us being beholden to change with incredibly negative consequences. And so I'm just wary of time here, apologies. But yeah, just to kind of to conclude, we looked at some really incredible global inspirations to base our proposal on. Bargaining for the common good is something that brings together community organisations and community organising with trade unions specifically to kind of identify shared challenges, and that's something that is a real inspiration for what we proposed with the worker centres. Another example was Self-Employed Women's Association of India, which are a trade union that was formed in the 1970s and recognises full employment or you know, good employment as being beyond the boundaries of the workplace, and also including things like social security, childcare and housing. So it's not kind of limiting our sites to just the workplace, which again is something that the worker centres would seek to address through the kind of advisory capacity and political education. Yeah, and then, you know, kind of, as I said right at the beginning, what we really need to be doing just informally, but right away, is raising our expectations and demands as workers and educating each other on what our demands of the workplace should be and not settling for any less. It's very easy to think that you're expecting too much from the workplace and you sometimes have to bolster each other in raising those demands. And then, yeah, just the other two, foster solidarity with migrant workers. That's essential for achieving workplace justice, and political education, which kind of speaks to the first one. But yeah, is definitely something that is needed to kind of revitalise community life and increase our well-being in the workplace and our paying conditions.
Okay, thank you, Emily. That's really, really great. I'm going to move us on quite quickly. I'm going to save my cultural question for the breakout rooms. So Francis, do you want to tell us what's happening next?
Yeah, so rather than people asking sort of individual questions, what we wanted to do was just put you into breakout rooms so you could discuss together and come up with sort of the things that have really resonated with you, and come up with a couple of questions that facilitators in each of the breakout rooms will kind of compile, and then we'll come back into the room for the last 20 minutes where we can ask the speakers a few of those selected questions across those broad themes. So I think we're going to spin you out across the ether into breakout rooms right now, and our lovely facilitators are going to take some notes and help that conversation along. So yeah, thank you everybody.
Everybody, I hope you had a useful time in your breakout rooms. Okay, so we're going to try and pull together some of those questions and direct them to our speakers. I might start with actually my sort of cultural question, which I was really interested in, because we were talking a lot about, I suppose, democracy in the workplace, and I'm kind of interested in, culture is very powerful. Is a culture of democracy equally, if not more important than a sort of structure of democracy in the workplace? And I wonder if someone else wants to kick off with that before I choose someone.
I'm happy to kick off. I think
Dorothy, thank you.
The culture is essential, and it trumps structure every time. You can have all the structure you want, but if the culture within that structure, if the culture is wrong within that structure, it's never going to work. You can have good cultural organizations that operate as cooperatives or social enterprises without even knowing those words, but they're doing what is right. They're doing what they know is the right thing for their workers, for their communities. So I think that culture will always eat structure for breakfast and lunch and dinner.
So do we not necessarily need democratic structures? Or is that, I mean, Henry must be here somewhere.
Yeah, I think we need democratic structures to run an organization, but I think culture is very, very important. I mean, that's what changed things. And in our union, this is something that has created real change for workers in workplaces. Because sometimes if you, sometimes there's structures that are there as barriers for workers rather than support. So we need to break those barriers and in terms of improve the conditions for workers.
Thank you. Do any one of our other speakers want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I agree that culture is really important, and I think you can have, there's definitely a case where you could have democratic structures that are very tokenistic, and without a culture of practice, they can be completely ineffectual. But I also think that a culture of democracy isn't necessarily static, and I think it has to be backed up by structure. I also think like there's turnover in workplaces, and what could be a good democratic culture with one set of people, as soon as those people leave, if the structures aren't in place to maintain them, then that could easily be overturned. And I suppose I'm speaking particularly from a union perspective here, that when we make gains, we have to enshrine them in policy or structure in order to secure them for posterity. So I do think that culture is probably the most significant thing in terms of the practice, but I think that it has to be backed up by structure.
It's a bit yes and, isn't it? Lindsay?
Yeah, and I mean, I probably agree with everybody in the sense that I think the culture is absolutely what drives it. I think there is a danger that what happens is we end up with structures that become so enshrined, they don't move on. So I suppose in the best system, I think the two things go hand in hand, because the culture means you're constantly reviewing and you're constantly asking questions, and you're allowing the process of sort of growth and development, and for everybody to be part of that conversation. So I think when it works really well, it can be that. In the end, culture for me has to be the most important, because if you have a culture that allows that constant move forward, then you're fine. I guess I think the other thing is it depends quite a lot on the size of organisation. And I suppose I would say that, you know, it's very different to be working in a business that's employing 50,000 people than it is if you're working in something which is, you know, people know each other. I think that raises another question about whether we should have organisations that are 50,000 people with a set of rules, because I think it's probably quite hard to arrive at cultures within that are self-managing in the same way. But yeah, so I'm definitely there with culture, but I do think the structures are really important, particularly around things like pay and rights for different groups. I think that's really, really important.
Thank you. A question that came up in my breakout, and I see that was asked in a couple of the others, is this idea that we're, as business kind of coaches and people trying to move people who are the furthest from employment into work. We're so kind of intent on moving people into work that we're not actually thinking about the kind of work that we're moving them into. And we're not thinking about like equipping them with ideas about cooperation, cooperatives, different models, but also about how they might organise and unionise once they're in the workplace. And I think probably just to start with Henry, just how much you think over the last sort of 8 years or so, it's become more mainstream with younger people and other people that unions aren't seen as being like the old school thing that they were, but actually being a worker is something that and unionising is more kind of mainstream.
Yeah, I guess the way work is defined now with these new platforms, especially, you know, digital platforms taking over the jobs that we do, this has changed the way we work, and that includes a lot of people. You see now like academics who are put on precarious contracts. You see platforms like Amazon, Uber, Deliveroo, and all these that are changing the way people think about work, but also the concern that it brings to a lot of people, a lot of young people as well, about the way things are changing and how we're losing working conditions. I think people have realized that, I mean, union like us have made people realize that there is hope, and that by getting involved in unions, real change can happen. I mean, in our union, we have loads of young people who are given the opportunities to be involved in collective action, be involved in organizing workers. We have people in university, young people being with cleaners, organizing them outside at 5 o'clock in the morning, going make tea, make coffee, together organizing the union. And by then they have become activists in the union, that they are more happy to be supporting this cause, because they know how important it is for workers.
Thank you. Dorothy.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question again?
Yeah, sorry, it was a bit slightly rambling. Just about how as we're moving people into work, whether people, you know, in your case, or like business, you know, people coaching young people into business, or and other people who are sort of furthest from the workplace, we're just so eager to get them into any kind of work. We're not sort of really being able to champion the real democratic workplaces.
Well, that's always been an issue of mine, you know, in an organisation such as CASE, where I work. There's often the conflict in that we're not a funded organisation. We bid for contracts. We're completely self-sufficient, and so we have to bid in for contracts to keep ourselves going. And sometimes contracts come up, and you look at them and you think, no, that's just about getting people into work. That's just about ticking off numbers, and we cannot do that. We cannot ethically work in something like that, because people demand more than that. I've already laid out my table in terms of my stall, in terms of what I think work should be about. It should be fulfilling, it should be enriching, It should be enlarging your life, not diminishing from it. And it's not just about being in work. That is not enough. It's about being in good work, high quality work, and work that satisfies. And in our organisation at CASE, we try to promote that to the people we work with. We try to make sure that they have good and enduring work, because enduring is important as well. You know, we're very pleased that we have organisations such as Shropshire Carers, who I profiled when I spoke, who were 27 years old, Leicester Whole Foods, who were 35, Soft Touch, who were nearly 40, etc. Because it's about good quality employment that allows people to live a good life and to live their principles through their work and spread that into their lives, their community activism, their volunteering, etc. So yeah, it's not just about work. No work. Some people would argue that no work is better, any work is better than no work. I would argue against that. I'd say we all have the right to good work. That is a human essential, and I think we should all be afforded that right.
Thank you, Dorothy. Lindsay.
Completely agree. And yes, we don't, we never just encourage people to just go for any old job in order to fulfill the contracts. And as Dorothy has said, there are some contracts we just won't touch for those reasons. So I think, and it's sort of what I was saying at the beginning, you know, it's about people working out who they are and what the balance is for them. And that's always incredibly different, and that's really important. And I think the idea of, I think what's really interesting is the idea of belonging, I think, is utterly critical, but there are lots of different things that people choose to belong to. And it's quite interesting, particularly say working in somewhere like Cornwall, where it's a very remote, you know, lots of quite remote communities. There's I think we have tiny number, something like 5 big businesses in Cornwall. It really is very small. Most people are working in quite flexible portfolio ways because that's the way the economy works. And so finding things for them, finding ways for people to build alliances and belong, as Dorothy has said, is often linked to community activism and a whole thing that go with their work. So I think we, you know, spend a lot of time actually encouraging people to say, who are you? What matters to you? What's the balance for you? And actually the idea of, yeah, some sort of conventional, you know, right, just go and get yourself in the bottom rung and keep going is probably not going to work very well. We also now, and I think technology is really interesting because in some ways, one of the things we have experienced during the pandemic has been quite a lot of young people who have a lot of challenges, you know, several who've not left their bedrooms for years, who are actually saying, wow, you know, we know how to do this. We know how to work from our, you know, our bedrooms. And in some ways, actually, that's been incredibly empowering for them to actually be able to help other people find ways of navigating it. So I think where we are is very much the idea that what we're going to see is people need to control what's the balance, and they need to control what's the balance of their life and how they work. And I was really interested in the idea of shorter working hours, because I agree, I think that's what we all ought to be doing. But I also think people need to find a way to be able to control that and make their choices for them. So what we've been able to do, and we're lucky to be able to do this, is, you know, we can be very flexible. And so if people want to go and spend a couple of hours in the middle of the day, you know, taking the dog for a walk or doing whatever, and they just fit it around, that's absolutely fine. I had a fantastically interesting conversation with somebody from Babcock's who they run the dockyard in Devonport, absolute opposite of, you know, the sort of company we are. They used the pandemic and suddenly realised, amazing as it was, that getting everybody into the dockyard at 8 o'clock every morning and turfing them out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon actually was a complete waste of their time. And they were much better, because everybody had to work from home, to just be terribly relaxed and let people work when they wanted to, whenever they wanted to. So I suppose a little bit of optimism. I have seen that through the pandemic, actually there have been some quite significant shifts in places you might not expect. And I think that's, I don't know, we'll have to see whether we can continue it, but that's the sort of thing where it feels like, how do we find some of those little green shoots and build on them? is really important at the moment, because otherwise we could slide back, and that would be, you know, awful. There's lots to deal with because the pandemic's been awful for lots of people, but there are a few little green shoots that it feels like we need to grab hold of and do something with.
Thank you. And Emily, just as a young woman who's a shop steward.
So is the original question, sorry, was that about democracy and young people in the workplace?
Effectively, yeah. How we enable people to see that being unionised or seeing themselves as workers is a positive thing, that and solidarity and cooperation.
Yeah, I think this is a huge challenge at the moment. I'm doing some work on green transition, and quite a lot of the conversation is about with young workers who don't even know what trade unions are, and their parents, you know, might not have been unionized. If we're thinking about the generation that's coming up now, how do you spell out the need for that? And I think there is a danger as well with people being hired on or young people being hired in apprenticeship schemes that seem from the outside pretty good. I went to visit a factory in Sheffield before the pandemic. There was actually built on the site of the Battle of Iwgb, which is where, if people aren't aware, Margaret Thatcher sent the army in to confront striking miners. And in that very poignant location is a factory where they are bringing in young people on apprenticeships on seemingly decent wages, but none of them are unionized. And when we got shown around the factory, there was such a paternalistic culture that was being kind of described to us from the foremen or the people who were the employers. And my concern was not about the wages immediately, because the wages for 18-year-olds seem pretty good, but how are those 18-year-olds going to maintain those wages and improve their conditions? And how will they complain about workplace discrimination or harassment, or any kind of needs that they might have from the workplace that aren't being met, unless they are unionized and unless they have someone who can continue to fight to maintain those conditions? And that's really worrying, because there's this idea that you only need a union if you're employed by the worst of the worst employers, and it just isn't the case. As I said in my presentation, the only way that we as workers can guarantee a good deal is if we fight for it, and the only way we can fight for it is by collectivizing. So it is a huge challenge, and the sort of green shoots that I do see emerging, which, I mean, I completely agree, Dorothy, we shouldn't just have work that is sort of fulfilling basic needs. It needs to be good work. The green shoots that I do see emerging there are like more innovative tactics from unions in outreach or reaching gig economy workers. And again, you know, just absolute kudos to the Iwgb, also Uwgb, I'm aware, do lots of incredible work in that space. There is work that's being done to reach out to young workers, to atomize workers, but it's not easy, and the challenge is just more important than ever to meet.
Thank you, Emily. So I'm conscious of time, and I could carry on this conversation for a very long time. It's been utterly fascinating, and I think Ed's going to talk a little bit more about the other events that lead on from this. But I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's attended today and been part of this conversation, to our speakers in particular. So thank you, all four of you, been amazing. To our facilitators, and to Ruby and Tom and Amy in the background, and to Power to Change for supporting and funding the event. We'll be sending out the recordings to all of you as soon as they're ready, and also we can make sure that you get the slides as well. And now I'll hand over to Ed. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Frances, and thank you all again. Just to say, don't forget, today is the first of 4 sessions as we sort of delve into sort of unpacking the sprawling suitcase of new municipalism and community power. We will be back next week at the same time in the same place, 27th of April, to support to explore the state of spaces and places, how are people building power, community power and economic democracy in the public realm, be that parks or in high streets. We have another 4 fantastic speakers from here in Plymouth. We have Nudge Community Builders, Stiltskin and the Soapbox Theatre. From my old hometown, Cardiff, we have Butetown Matters, a fantastic journey of resisting gentrification in the docks in Cardiff. And similarly, we have Latin Village from London town. So we do hope you can join us, and we look really forward to seeing you all again next week. I think that's probably a bye from now.